This is We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills to love better so you can live better. I have a question for you. If someone you cared about was silently struggling with a mental health issue, would you know what to do? Would you even recognize the signs? More importantly, would you feel confident enough to help? Or would you be more inclined to stay quiet, worried you'd say something wrong? Most people assume that they'll know how to help. But mental health crises, they don't announce themselves. They're quieter than physical emergencies, harder to spot, easier to ignore. Mental health first aid is about changing that. It's a framework designed to give everyday people, not therapists, not doctors, but you, the tools to step up and step in before a crisis becomes a tragedy. Today, I'm joined by two colleagues who've been at the forefront of this work, helping people recognize the subtle signs that something isn't right and teaching people how to respond. We are diving into the real indicators of mental health distress, the ones most people miss, so you can learn what to do when they show up. Because just like CPR, mental health first aid can mean the difference between tragedy and hope. Please welcome Dr. Joseph Donnelly and Elena Saldutti. Full disclosure, Dr. Donnelly sat on my dissertation committee when I was getting my PhD at NYU. If my obsession with data and statistics annoys you, now you know who's to blame. Let's jump in. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I hadn't even truly registered that this was a topic. I always had the internal sense that this should be a topic, like in much the same way we talk about, medical first aid. I've always known that there needed to be something for mental health first aid, but it was only after you guys published your article, or your article was published, that I had the idea along with Joseph, and I'm so grateful that you guys agreed to do this with me, so thank you. Most people assume that they would recognize when someone is struggling, but mental health issues, they can be incredibly subtle. So in your experience, what are some of the most commonly overlooked signs that someone might need help, that we might miss?
Yeah, a question that I'll often ask is, what's the most dangerous and deadly animal in the world? And people may instinctually think alligators or sharks or something like this. But the most dangerous animal in the world is a mosquito. Over 750,000 people every year die from mosquitoes, okay? And so it's not the big things in life that get us. Oftentimes it's the little things, those little things that add up, the little invisible things. So I think it's really important for us not to think, oh my gosh, they're talking about harming themselves, or, they don't show up for parties anymore, or they're really quiet, or they don't sleep at all, sleep all the time. Those are things that we might be able to see. But I think oftentimes it's the invisible things, the little cues, if you will, that we might just observe. And that observation might be some simple things. It might be maybe not so much what they're saying or not saying, maybe the tone in their voice. Because oftentimes we always get caught up with, what are they saying? Well, when we talk about communication, only 7% of a message is conveyed through the words we use, whereas 38% through intonation or inflection, 55% through body language. So it's being observant as to what's happening and not happening. That's kind of a few thoughts that I have.
And when you say it's the little things like tonality can change, so what exactly do you mean by that? Give me an example of how somebody's tone might change that could indicate that there's something going on with them. Do they suddenly get flat in their affect? Like if they're melodic, or somebody who is very expressive through their voice the way I think I can be, are they suddenly like talking like this, like way low? Like, what do you mean?
I'll respond with a big maybe, and I share that though, because maybe it really depends on each person. I mean, sometimes maybe like you're saying, somebody who's a little bit more energized. Yeah, I know that if I stop talking or talk less, people say, is everything okay? because I talk a lot, maybe too much. And Elena, you
You
know
do
this.
you do talk a good amount.
Those signs may be more subtle and they may be easily missed. So I think just checking in, if something seems off, shift in personality, something different with their habits, then yes, trust your gut, check in.
Yeah.
If someone's
Yeah.
behavior feels different, even if it's subtle, just check in with them.
And it's kind of neat though, because they talk about taking someone's temperature, like you're saying, checking in. How's it going? And you kind of, and I think in a large extent, what I say about this one here is, many years ago, back in 1995, I was at a commencement ceremony, and Dr. Ernest Boyer, he did the commencement ceremony. And what he said is, the reason why so many students at the time were dropping out of high school is because so many teachers never knew they dropped in. And,
Wow.
and I found that so profound. I never wrote it down. It just stuck in my memory forever. And I shared it with, with some of the students of mine. And I think it's not just about being a teacher, but it's about being a parent, checking in with your child or a friend. And, the check-in, temperature checks, whatever you want to call it, I think that's really important.
That makes so much sense. And that gave me a chill, the quote that you gave me. So thank you for that. Sometimes mental health issues don't present as sadness or anxiety. What are some unexpected ways mental health issues can show up, especially in adults, and how can we tune into those signals?
So, mental health distress may not always show up in the ways that we expect. So, one of the more surprising signs we can detect that distress is through irritability and anger. So, those frustrations, that short temper, those outbursts can be indicators that there's something else going on. There's that stress or there's that emotional exhaustion. It's not always about feeling sad. It's not always about feeling or experiencing that firsthand by witnessing it. Another important thing is certainly those physical symptoms that are oftentimes overlooked, those chronic headaches, those digestive issues, those tensions. So mental health struggles manifesting as these physical ailments. And then there's things like overworking. Some people really just kind of like to dive deep and, really put themselves 100% towards work and really kind of avoiding the issue. And so it's a way for them to exert that control in something that really feels difficult to control or impossible to. So social withdrawal, we know is a well-known sign that there certainly is something going on with regards to mental health. But also socializing can be a coping mechanism. So if somebody's filling their schedule, avoiding that alone time, that's certainly something to kind of check in and kind of gauge. You know your friends, you know their habits. If something seems slightly off, checking in is really, really important. So how do we tune in? We pay attention. We pay attention to the changes. If someone's habits, something shifts, it's very important to ask questions that are not going to be interpreted in a way where people feel judged. So asking questions like, are you okay? May then elicit a quick automatic response from that person. Instead, try something like, I've noticed you've been distracted. I've noticed that you are less likely to come and hang out with us. How have you been feeling? It really opens the door for a conversation. So, instead of getting a quick yes or no, you really want to encourage that communication.
That makes a lot of sense. So instead of saying, you good, everything okay, it's a leading question, it's going to lead to a canned response more often than not, really reflecting back the changes that you're observing. It seems to me, we were hanging out today and, maybe the person answered a question in a snappy kind of way. We were hanging out today and you didn't seem yourself. I just want to check in with you. Does that qualify?
Yes, 100%. And it's not about having the answers. It's not about providing the solution to the problem. It's just being present and showing somebody that you're caring of them and something feels off. So trust your instinct because, maybe it's that moment of connection that really shifts gears for them.
We know in hindsight that when there's an overdose or a suicide or, a mental health crisis, people who are closest to that person can generally hearken back and land on, oh, gee, they were a little off. There were some things, but it doesn't always rise to the level of alarm that most of us understand a mental health crisis to be indicated.
Correct. And it may not be at the level of a crisis, but to see somebody in distress, these are perfect steps to take. Really just making sure you're reaching out and connecting with them because, mental health can feel intimidating. It
Mhm.
can feel overwhelming and not really quite sure how to navigate that. But knowing that somebody else is there to support you really can go a long way.
What I'm hearing here is a word change. I keep hearing change, a change in behavior, a change in this or that. And change is natural. I mean, we're dynamic beings and people change all the time, but I think it would be along the lines of a consistent change in whatever behavior, a consistent change in personality. Somebody has a one-off bad day, bad week, fluctuation. But when you see some consistency to these change of behaviors, and you should maybe put up a red flag to where individuals start to say, well, they are really must be struggling. How can I step in? How can I provide them some support?
Makes sense. In your publication, you mentioned that hesitation often comes from not wanting to say the wrong thing. What are some simple, non intrusive ways that people can start a conversation when they're concerned about someone?
So I think it's important that when we are starting that conversation, we want to make it clear that we're making observations rather than assumptions. We don't want to go in saying, you seem really depressed,
Yeah.
because then that automatically sets the tone for that conversation and that dialogue. So perhaps think about something along the lines of, I've noticed you've been quieter than usual. What's going on? Again, we want really to keep that open-ended question there. We want the person to feel comfortable sharing at their comfort level. Maybe they're just not there yet, and that's okay. Meet them where they are. Meet them with, I am here in case you need me. Um, in case something changes in your world, I am a person that can be support to you.
That makes sense. I can imagine people really hesitating to be intrusive, especially like we live in a hypersensitive world right now. Everybody is afraid of saying the wrong thing, expressing the wrong idea, or the wrong preference, being canceled. And nobody wants to drive their close friend or, their colleague further away. So I can imagine people would be hesitant to lean into a conversation on this. I'm just wondering what the downside. I'm answering my own question in my head, of course. What is the downside of not asking the question?
The would haves and should haves, we want to normalize behavior that is, people get stressed, people feel overwhelmed. It is normal. And I think that the more we can kind of emphasize it's normal, we will experience these overwhelming situations in life. And so to navigate that together is really important because we may not have the perfect solution to that issue or that problem, but at least we're working together on finding the support.
I liked what you said, Elena. You said something about, helping them where they are. And, in the field of addictions, and I don't think it's much different in mental health arena, is, the motto in addictions is harm reduction. Help people wherever they are, not where you want them to be, not where you think they should be, but where they are. And sometimes you just have to be there for them. And them just knowing that there's somebody in their corner, somebody willing to help them out, somebody that might get it the best that they can. And I think that's really important, but wherever they are, because sometimes, like you're saying, Elena, I think it's very profound where giving them some space rather than solving an issue, giving them some space, but letting them know, hey, we're comfortable being in their space and there to help.
Yes,
Yeah.
and checking in doesn't need to be a one-time thing.
Yes.
You can check in along the way and say, "Hey, I was thinking about you. How are things going?" And so I think just kind of maintaining that connection is so important because they may not be ready during that initial conversation, but down the line they may be, and they may be hesitant to reach out. So I think if you're aware that they're struggling, or if you know that there's a history there, just check in, connect.
Most of us understand why it's a good idea to learn CPR, but mental health first aid is often overlooked. Why do you think there's still such a gap in how prepared we are to support mental health emergencies compared to physical health emergencies?
Dr. Darcy, I absolutely love this question because I think people, it's so almost instinctual, in terms of if somebody is in a crisis, to offer them some type of physical medical support best that individual is able to do. Many, many years ago, I was a CPR instructor, first aid instructor, and I never even heard about mental health first aid. So this is really wonderful that this is evolving into a situation where 4 million individuals have mental health first aid certificates here in the United States. 4 million, nearly 1 out of 100, which is good, but obviously there's so much more to go. But let's imagine we're walking down the street, somebody trips over a curb or they collapse. Our immediate thought is, how can we help them? Even strangers may come up and, oh, are you okay? But if someone's having a mental health issue, there's a lot of stigma attached there. And I think there's also, a lot of people, they just don't know what to do, what to say, how to help, how to reach out. When's a good time? What should they say? Could they say? What do they not want to say? So there's a lot of challenges there. But I think it's important for people to have some level of emotional and mental health training, and just some ability, willingness to be comfortable. Like Elena is saying, be comfortable to reach out and check in. And but I think it needs to be more ingrained into our society, where CPR, you see this happening. Somebody has somebody's life is saved, whether it's real world, television, movie, but you don't hear about mental health first aid. It becomes more of a stigma. Like, they'll use a lot of slang terms, which further separate us from wanting to help people who are having challenges. But everybody has challenges emotionally, physically. So how can we step in and help? I think it's great. And the connection of these two, it sure does make people open up their eyes and say, wait a minute, why don't we have mental health first aid as well as other first aid?
Yes.
You mentioned something which reminded me of something that I'm going to share. When Steph and I go out to dinner in New York, and we'll often, as the weather warms up, we'll eat al fresco. We'll be outside, and there's lots of homeless people in every urban environment in the country, and certainly in New York City. And if there's someone who is unhoused or homeless and they appear to be struggling, usually it's with psychosis or, having a delusion, something quite obvious. They're talking to someone that we don't see. They're having a dialogue with someone that is not there. Steph and I will just look at each other and say, who's going to handle it? And then one of us will go over and just talk to the person. And, we kind of flip a coin. We're like, okay, who's going to handle this? Because what we don't want is we don't want the other diners to then get escalated or nervous or start negatively engaging with the person. Where, you don't see negative engagement with the person. Generally, people are quiet. And if the person doesn't de-escalate or continues to escalate, people get scared, the cops get called, and, not everyone knows how to respond to a situation like that. So we try to mitigate it. Steph and I are like, who's going to handle it? And one of us goes and we talk to the person, we engage with them, we see if we can help or if there's anything they need. But those are very obvious examples of somebody struggling with mental health. I can also imagine walking down the street of New York and seeing someone in physical need, like in quick physical need of medical intervention. I'm curious, do either of you guys have examples of, I'm walking down the street in New York, how do I know if somebody's having a mental health crisis? I mean, other than the girl that's on the phone crying, because that's every 20th person in New York City,
Mhm.
we all do that. We're like on the phone having a very heated conversation with somebody, we all feel a little invisible in the crowd. We feel anonymous in the crowd. And so you see somebody like crying or screaming on the phone, that is just another Sunday in New York City. That's nothing to blink at. So
Mhm.
what am I looking for if I'm looking for examples of somebody who might be having, a more subtle mental health emergency where they could use my help?
Well, I think that that's gonna vary depending on where you are, how much you know of the person, because what you may assume be occurring may be something completely different, and it's difficult to kinda tease that out in the moment. But I think the hesitation of people want to help, right? They're typically wanting to assist in a crisis situation. That emotional discomfort oftentimes comes into play because they're potentially fearful of saying the wrong thing. They don't want to further trigger or further instigate out an already heightened situation. So I think people tend to take up more of, they tend to back away instead of leaning into those circumstances and those situations. So that's something that I think is important to also keep in mind. It's that the intention is that they want to help, they're just not sure how to, and they don't want to make it worse. And then I think it's important to then, you want to keep them safe, but you also want to keep yourself safe. So I think knowing your limits, you not wanting to take on certain circumstances if you don't feel equipped or don't feel confident that you would be able to maintain that safety.
I really like what you just said there, especially about the safety, Elena. I think it's really important, and I'll say this I'll say this with an explanation. I think it's important for somebody to stay within their own lane, to be safe, to be in a safe situation, to not put themselves or others, at risk if they overstep their boundaries. Yeah, I do know that most police officers do have mental health first aid certification, so they have that, that ability to do it, but that it may be a little less. Less comfortable for a police officer to be speaking to somebody who's going through a trauma. But I think we need to do what's comfortable, what's safe, what's safer, while still trying to de-escalate, as Dr. Darcy so eloquently said, and create a safer outcome for everyone.
There's a delicate balance between obviously being supportive and overstepping. So, how can someone offer real meaningful help without coming across as intrusive or making the other person feel uncomfortable?
So I think it's important to understand that the line between support and intrusion is a fine line. It's an art.
Hmm.
At its core, meaningful support starts with listening. We don't want to jump in with solutions and problem solve without really fully understanding what the person needs, what they're looking for, what they're lacking. So again, important to start with those open-ended questions. How can I support you? What would be the most helpful thing for you in this moment? And again, we want to keep the focus on their needs, not what we're assuming is actually happening, but
Hmm.
again, knowing that there to support them, we're there to be a help for them, whatever that is. And being also respectful of boundaries. Again, if people don't feel comfortable, they may need that space. They may need, time to really kind of do whatever they feel is most comfortable and most important in that moment. They may not be where you think they are. But again, I'm here. I'm here if you need me, no pressure. Again, it does not put people in an uncomfortable position for them to behave in a way that they think you want them to behave in.
Right. So we don't want to provoke performance from the other person. Um, and literally asking them, how can I support you? How can I help?
Mhm.
What can
Yes.
I do? Those are questions that aren't overly intrusive. They're not intrusive at all. You're just acknowledging that you're noticing something, and you're there to listen or whatever
Mhm.
else the person needs. I think even if the person doesn't need or want anything, just expressing that you noticed is you, as just to dovetail on what Joseph said at the top of our conversation, it's you
Mhm.
dropping in, noticing that the person is literally before you and noticing a distinction in how they're behaving or what they look like or what they sound like. And that in and of itself can be protective.
And I think it's important to also be self-aware, right? Because oftentimes we provide support because, is it for their benefit or is it because we don't feel comfortable with them struggling, which is a huge piece. It has to
Yes,
be
it
genuine help. So again, genuine help is about them. It's not about you.
Yeah, I love what you said there, though, Darcy. And you're saying this in other ways too, Elaine, in terms of, what can I do to lend support? And most people, they'll never hear that because people aren't quite sure how to ask that. And you're teeing it up real nicely here, Elena, with some of the things with the algae mental health first aid, assessing the situation, assessing the circumstances, listening to what they're saying or not saying, and there's different levels of how you can step into it to provide some good support. And whenever I think about support, I always think about connections, and I know I tie a lot of my responses to addiction because I teach alcohol and other drug education prevention programs. But oftentimes the question is asked: why do people, begin using drugs and or become addicted to drugs? Because they don't feel connected. How do you get them off of drugs? By reestablishing connections with people, with things to do, and so forth. And a lot of this is right within the mental health area. So if you can be part of that connection, if you can somehow create some synergism where it's you and this other individual and or someone else, now you become much stronger as a team, and you're letting them know they're not alone. You're here, and there's other ways that we can provide support.
Underscoring the connection is everything. It's so protective from trauma and other mental health problems. We see it across all realms of research in mental health. Your publication talks about cultural humility rather than a one-size-fits-all approach to offering support when you think that somebody is struggling with a mental health condition. So why do cultural differences impact how we should recognize and respond to a mental health issue, what we perceive to be a mental health issue?
So mental health is experienced and expressed differently across cultures, across communities, and even differently within families. So cultural humility really means acknowledging we don't have all the answers. And we really need to be open to listening and learning and respecting somebody's backgrounds or their beliefs. Some cultures, mental health isn't even discussed at all. It's a non-topic, but it may be expressed that mental health struggles may be expressed through physical symptoms and manifesting itself like headaches, fatigue. So, and others, it may be a sign of weakness or bring shame to the family. So that's something that we certainly need to keep in mind when we're offering the type of support. Not everybody responds well to the same resources or through the same language. So, understanding that, there may be a bit of uncomfortability or, and acknowledging that and being aware of that.
Yeah.
Elaine, I really like what you say there because everything, everything, everyone is different, and especially cultures and different, different genders, different everything, and and even if they may not accept some of the things that otherwise, you think, well, you can help somebody by doing certain things or saying certain things. It may not work with them. But that doesn't mean that there's not other ways that you can connect and help them to feel good, give some focus for future or something. Maybe that's, like you say, maybe having a cup of coffee with them, letting them know if you ever want to talk, or, so just kind of giving them an opportunity to feel that they're part of another circle and that they're not alone, I think is really important. And I think that's certain things, they cross all cultural boundaries. And I think if a person feels good and or they can become capable of feeling good about themselves, I think that crosses all boundaries.
I also wonder, and this might be my social work training, because I'm a trained social worker, as we all know. I also wonder if sometimes what might look like a problem or an issue through the lens that I see the world would be not a problem from the person's culture and perspective that they have life experience in. For example, at the top of this conversation, before we hit record, I said, so guys, if and when we step on each other's audio, let's just say it again so that it can all be understood. And Elena said, I'm come from a big Italian family. We do it all the time. I'm like, I'm Jewish. We do it all the time. Like, so sometimes just to zoom out and, explain this in terms of mental health issues. So sometimes people think I'm mad, but I'm just excited and I'm just talking like this and I'm animated and my hands are moving and my eyebrows, despite the Botox, are still going up and down because there's no amount that can paralyze my face. And people can sometimes think that I'm escalated and I'm really just excited and passionate about what's happening. So they could think I'm angry when I'm not, which is why I've learned to try and titrate the expression and the volume of my voice. I wonder what you guys think about seeing things through our unique perspective and assuming that that's how every culture operates. And so if Joseph Donnelly is not responding the way Darcy Sterling would respond, there must be he might be in a mental health crisis. Can one of you guys touch on that?
We can't go in with a rigid checklist. We can't go in thinking, okay, this is what we think distress looks like. And we need to follow kind of these specific guidelines. And it applies to everybody across cultures, across situations. So we have to be flexible. You can't go in assuming. We want to get more information, asking questions. What does support look like for you? Who do you turn to when you're struggling? Who is in your support system? I think can really kind of lend itself to understanding more of what type of community that person has built around them, and then kind of working with that to help them navigate this difficult situation.
Yeah, I think that a rigid response doesn't serve anybody well. I oftentimes share with my students, I say that whenever I come into the classroom, I'm never 100% prepared. I'm always about 90% prepared. And they look at me and say, you mean you're not ready to teach? I say, no, I need to be flexible. If I'm 100% prepared, that means I know exactly what I'm going to do and say. Flexible. Somebody asks a question about this, we pivot. And I think that's, with the emotional mental health, we need to be willing to pivot, whatever direction they're coming from, help them where they are, whether they're upset, whether they're quiet. And I think that's really important. I think we'll get the most out of them and they'll get the most out of us if we could just be open.
That's so interesting, Joseph, that you say that. I'm going to say for the record that Dr. Joseph Donnelly's 90% is other people's 180%. So, but whatever you have to tell yourself, brother, so you can be flexible on your toes, do it. I mean, that's actually, it's pretty amazing to me. I can't believe that you intend to be less than completely prepared so you can be flexible and not rigid. That's a great strategy. I love that.
And full disclosure, many years ago, Darcy was a student of mine and we published an article together. Yeah.
Yes, we did. He was my very first publication, was co-authored by Dr. Donnelly.
Yeah, that's great.
So once someone recognizes the signs and starts the conversation, what are the next steps? What do they do next?
So again, I think it's important to understand that we're not diagnosing. We're not fixing the problem right off the bat. We're really just building a bridge for support, validating their feelings. Somebody comes or it appears that something is going on, it's something you've observed or something that they've brought to you, validating. I'm really glad you shared this with me. It sounds like that's really difficult. I'm here for you. Really, it can go a long way for people. That simple statement really can kind of carry, and making people feel heard and not judged, I think is really important as well. Exploring other options together. Have you thought about potentially talking to somebody about this? Is that something that we could investigate together? If I can be a support to you to help look into resources.
Mm-hmm. And Elena knows that it would not be a conversation if somehow, some way I did not infuse prevention. Okay. So I infuse this into everything. And I think that we're going to see people, whether it's a child, whether it's a family member, friend, we're going to see them in different levels. And I mean, primary prevention, sure, we would love to catch them and educate them early so this stuff doesn't happen, but that's never going to happen. Life happens. People get stressed. Things, different circumstances, challenges occur. We can provide primary prevention and educational foundation so they have good emotional infrastructure. And that would really help mitigate some of those things that occur down the line. Secondary prevention, early detection. I think that's where we're going to spend much of our time.
Yeah.
Detecting some of these nuances. Somebody's upset or things are going on, they're struggling, they're quiet. I think that's where we're going to be. I think that's, if we're looking at a bell curve, that's probably where the good 60% of this is going to happen. And
it's so easy. If I can just jump in, Joseph, it's actually so fucking easy to do, you guys. Like, do we still check teenage girls for scoliosis in middle school? Like, the easiest thing on earth to do is to just administer a general wellness evaluation, a survey instrument that just flags for depression, anxiety, and I don't know, depression and anxiety. We'll start with real basic stuff. That would flag it. And that doesn't mean the kid gets a diagnosis and gets an IEP immediately. It just means that we then take it to the next level and we explore things a little bit. We can catch this stuff early. This is not rocket science.
And it's not, and it involves working together. At the adolescent level, we oftentimes see, or we interpret cohesion, particularly as it relates to things like social media, liking somebody's posts or responding online, that they have a genuine connectedness with their peer group. And oftentimes we're finding that that's not the case. Adolescents are often isolated. And so I think that that's something to also take into account, because it means working together. It means establishing these connections together and establishing something that, as a community, everybody can lean on each other for support, because it can't happen in isolation.
And by the way, we can also do the primary prevention, Joseph, that you spoke to, because we should be teaching emotional intelligence in grammar school and in middle school, so that actually middle school is the worst years of everybody's life. So if we taught people how to identify an emotion so that we could be more fluent in emotional vocabulary by the time we're in middle school, and we taught anti-bullying measures and inclusion and trained against cliques and excluding people, we could create a culture that is far more resilient than the one that we currently have now. I mean, Joseph, I'm sure you've heard me say this over the decades that we've known each other. It astounds me that we only teach abstract thought through algebra. Why are we not teaching abstract thought through emotional intelligence skills and relationship skills?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I think that's great. And why? I mean, you hear. Yeah, I know my daughter has a musician, Harry Styles, that she loves, and his slogan, if you will, is treat people with kindness. Shouldn't this be natural, just to be nice to people? And I mean, so if there's this harshness or some of the social media or some of these things that are happening that are emotionally detrimental, create this foundation where the core values should be something about being kind, maybe helping others, sharing love, all these types of things. But here we are. But that doesn't mean that we can't, extend our smile, some kindness, a good word, or, and I think what's really important, though, too, is aside from us doing things and saying things to other people, giving them the ability, the permission, if you will, to say and think good, nice things about themselves.
How would we do that?
Well, I think one of the things I used to do when I was, writing my dissertation on self-esteem, one of the things that we would focus on is for individuals to think about their personal strengths, skills, and positive qualities, to write a new one down every day. Because so oftentimes, people can really focus on what they did wrong, what their negative things are, and whatever that's their body or, what they're doing, saying, but giving them the permission to say, I do some things pretty good. I'm a good communicator. I write well. Good things, because whatever we focus on, it expands. If we think about all the negative, we get more negative. If we think about the good stuff, more good stuff comes.
Right. Which is not to say that we should mute all the negativity, because I think that can promote the mental health crisis we're trying to avoid here. But it's a yes and conversation. We're so good at drilling down on every mistake that we make. And if we were to employ, one of the top 5 positive psychology tools that are taught universally, what you're speaking to, Joseph, is a tool called savoring, where we drill down on the good thing that happened, or, the positive thing that we just experienced. We don't just gloss over it and be like, oh my God, I had a great day, on to the next, tough news story of the day. No, what was great about the day? Tell me the story, bring me into the scene. What was your favorite part? What was the temperature like? What was the room like? What was the lighting like? What was the sound like? Did you smell things? What did it feel like? Where in your body did you feel the good thing? And then, of course, what emotion went with that, and just notice that for 5 seconds before you let go of it and go on to CNN to see the next terrible thing that happened in the world.
I love it. I mean, that is absolutely embracing what's going on, and really putting your arms around it and giving it a big hug, rather than just you brush over the good stuff, but then you drill down on something.
We drill down, but we all organically know how to do this, especially those of us who are high achievers. We know how to critique ourselves to a molecular level, and we know how to really braise and steep in it. And it's not bad to drill down if you're trying to avoid it next time and create a different strategy. But if you're just going to do it to self-flagellate, that's a waste of energy. And we all do that organically to some extent. And what positive psychology has confirmed through decades of research at this point is that we can use those same skills that we use in a negative way for positive stuff. And it can really create a landing strip on our nervous system to then begin to recognize other good things that are happening, either with ourselves or with other people.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, in terms of making change happen, you can be in control of your family and what type of introduction and education and foundation is laid, especially when it comes to understanding emotions, and then it can be the smallest little addition to the communication and conversation you have with your children as young as you feel is appropriate. So, there's always opportunities to be able to kind of shift gears and lay and educate, certainly.
I love the idea of why are we not having, and maybe we do. Elena, I think you're a mom of a young child or children. Do we have emotionally intelligent toys and games that teach that? Do we have an emotions wheel that kids can begin to spin and land on the 5 primary emotions and stuff?
Yes, there are a slew of toys, of resources out there, certainly that will help facilitate that education and making sure that they have a clear understanding of what emotions mean and how it could look like and what it may look like in real life. But it's got to be an ongoing conversation. It's got to be the dialogue and the modeling at home. Children are very perceptive. They see things that you wouldn't think that they would see.
That you wish they didn't see.
And many times in that too. So it's being aware of that and always being that teacher to them. Modeling, and we're not perfect. We make mistakes, and showing them that that's okay to make a mistake.
Literally, I was just going to jump in and say the first 15 years of my career, I worked with teenagers and their parents, and I did a fair amount of parent coaching. That was not what I wanted to do. I mostly wanted to work with the teenagers. But one of the things that we would say is you're not going to be perfect, and when you fuck up, just acknowledge it and acknowledge it so that your child knows that they don't have to go in the
Yes.
corner with a dunce cap on when they make a mistake. Just model the resilience. Like, you can acknowledge the mistake, you can figure out the takeaway, you can apologize and repair. That goes so
Yes.
far.
Nice.
Yes. And that can then, that pattern of behavior then can be applied to so many other things as they grow and develop in life. It's that feeling that they have to be perfect. You do not have to be perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. And I don't expect you to be perfect. You're going to grow. You're going to learn through experiences. I'm here to be a support to you when you aren't perfect, so you can lean on me and then we can work through it together. But to avoid that end result of, this is the model I need to be and I need to strive for, is unrealistic. And then it creates so many other situations and expectations that are placed on the child or children in general that not intentional, but just a result of the situation.
Because I can tell you, fast forward to adulthood, I now work with adults, teaching relationship skills to individuals, regardless of what area of their life they need it in. Many of them apply it professionally, sometimes to their families, and of course to their intimate relationships. But the number of adults who don't know how to apologize for something, who avoid that, because it was never modeled to them, and to them it's such a shaming experience, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It's certainly possible, but, a little labor intensive to undo that as an adult. So much easier to just teach it to kids
Sure.
who don't have a slate written with shaming concepts on it yet, so they can just learn it. They're free to learn it. They don't have the bad habits of hiding and deflecting and denying when they make a mistake.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And they talk about that sometimes. I mean, the behavior may be bad or inappropriate, but that doesn't make the person bad. Correct the behavior. So whatever that is, people make mistakes. That's just life. But like you're saying, you don't have to shame or make the person feel, all that stuff.
Yeah,
Right.
because I remember when my children were little, just to get off on a little bit of a tangent in a story, somebody would do something they know was not appropriate, and they would say, "Oh, I was bad," and it would drive me crazy because my struggle with that, coming from the world that I come from and being a mom, I don't ever want my children to feel like they're bad. So I would rephrase it and say, "Oh, you made a red choice." And so we started to discern red choices from green choices. So it's not because you're inherently bad, and because then avoiding the possibility of them internalizing that as they
Right.
it's the choice that you made was not necessarily the best one, but that has nothing to do with you as a child, as a person.
Right.
Yeah.
Separating that.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, and if you're not going to memorize that, it's the shortcut, the cheat, the less sophisticated version of that is, you may have done a bad thing, but you're not a bad person. Like,
Yep.
the thing was bad, maybe,
Exactly.
I have so appreciated this conversation. I think that there are a lot of great takeaways. Where can people learn more about each of you? Elena, let's start with you.
So I do not currently have any type of social media, which I know sounds crazy. So I am an offshoot of Dr. Donnelly. So if you can find Dr. Donnelly, you will find me, because I am paired with him to support him in anything he does. So it's probably better to connect with him, and then you'll find me.
Joseph?
My email address here to begin with, it's very simple, Donnelly J, DONNELLYJ @Montclair, MONTCLAIR.edu. That's my email address. But Darcy, what I will share with you, Elaine and I were talking before this podcast here, is a few publications that we think would be very helpful for you and your audience. One, of course, is this mental health first aid. It says mental health first aid for teachers to strengthen and support students, building bridges, but this is for anybody, everybody. We have another publication that revolves around social emotional learning. Okay. And that, again, that's very universal. Another publication that specifically focuses on adolescent influences of social media. And, and we have a few others, but the primary premise of these are focusing mostly on adolescents, mostly on prevention of behaviors, and focusing on creating health. So, I'll share those with you. What Elaine and I have been talking about is having a monthly mental health strategy sheet. So, tips for April, tips for May, etc. And we could share those in turn. You could share those with your audience. But, as a good buddy of mine says all the time, in conclusion, he's a financial advisor, and his response is simple. He says, Joseph, health is wealth. And I think that's so critical. If you're not healthy physically and or mentally healthy, it doesn't matter what you have. What you have is what's in your heart and in your mind.
Yeah, health is wealth. Sounds like a real rich person said that. But I love it. I love it. And I'm gonna make sure I have all the resources linked in the show notes to all of those articles. Thank you both so much for joining me. This has been great. We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling is a Sterling Standard production. Editing and sound engineering is by Bart McGaw. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Cristiani and Robin Genshin. We'll be back Tuesday with another episode packed with the dating, relationship, and mental health hacks you've come to expect. References will be linked in the show notes. We'll see you soon.